Hello guys, welcome to another tutorial. So today we'll be looking at a different topic. We're considering the difference between a backend as a service and a custom backend. I know a lot of us have heard about a BaaS, which stands for Backend as a Service. So services like Supabase, what's it called again? This one by Google. All of them are basically backend as a service. So we want to look at the difference and when should you use a backend as a service. I see a lot of video now that are promoting backend as a service, and I just thought it would be good for you to know the difference. It's not in every application you should actually go for backend as a service. So when should you go for backend as a service? A lot of people like it because it simplifies their workflow and it makes development faster, but that is not the only thing you want to check when you're considering what architecture or what technology to use. So today we're going to consider that. We're going to look at that comprehensively and see which is better. So let's start. So first of all, what's a backend as is? First of all, what is a backend? Let's start with that. So a backend is basically a technology or architecture of an application that is responsible for managing data, the data processing request. It handles the server-side logic operations and allows the front end of the application to communicate with database and services. So in essence, what we are saying basically is that backend is like the logical part of the application. It's where you can say it's the brain of the website. When you are developing a interactive and website, you know, that is dynamic, then the backend becomes the logical center, like the brain of the whole application, because it's the intermediary between the database and the front end. It processes the logic behind a website. So that's basically it. In essence, you can say the backend is the engine that powers the functionality and features of an application. So basically, without a backend, you just have a beautiful interface that can do basically nothing. So then backend as a service. So backend as a service is a model where third-party services manages your backend for you, which involves your data, your logic, and all that is managed for you outside of your application, and manages it for you as a way to simplify your workflow and make development faster. It allows developers to focus more on the front end and user experience without worrying too much about server maintenance. You know, BBS often provide features like authentication, database, push notification, and cloud storage. So now that we've settled that, we need to understand a little bit more. So your custom backend is built by you and maintained by your entire backend infrastructure team, and is built by you from scratch. While a backend services is outsourced to a third-party provider, for example, AWS, you can see there Amplify, you have AWS, you have AWS, you know, and many others. You have Supabase and so on and so forth. These are all backend as a service. Even AWS offers backend as a service, even though they also offer hosting. So basically, that is that about that. Moving on, let us consider the feature comparison of backend as a service and building your own custom backend. So the first thing we want to look at is the scalability. Is how is it scalable? You know, when you build your application by yourself, you can manage it by yourself. So basically you can and do all this by yourself, so you manage your scaling and all that. But in the advent of a backend as a service, your provider usually does that for you, so you don't have control over that. So that doesn't give you much control over scaling, and sometimes it becomes expensive to scale with BaaS services. Sometimes it is quite expensive, and then looking at the development, of course, if you are developing your backend, it is much more slower than outsourcing it to a provider. But in terms of this AI generation, AI can simplify your workflow by times 10, so which means a app that can take you maybe 10 months eventually will take you just 1 month to build as a backend. So actually you can even build it in a day. So basically that is that about that. Now, concerning maintenance, maintenance becomes your responsibility when you build a custom backend, and but for BaaS, your provider manages that. And customization, if you are maintaining, if you have built your own backend, you are free to customize it however and whichever way you like. But for BaaS, you are limited to the customization your provider provides. So you can't go beyond what they provide. If you need much more service, you might need to pay more. Customizable service, you might need to pay more, because that means they will have to develop the feature for you, and they can only do that if you have to pay them to halt their development process and to focus on yours. You might need to talk to them personally, which might be very, very costly to do, and they might just tell you that they don't offer that service. So in terms of security, building your own backend, you have to configure. You are responsible for the whole security of the application from scratch to the end. You are responsible for everything. But in a case where it is outsourced, security no longer becomes your problem. So, and they have no choice than to use the highest form of security, because users' data is at stake, and that way you don't have to think about security because it is outsourced already. When it comes to the cost, it's variables for building a custom backend, and upfront it might be expensive upfront, but on the longer run it pays. But for BBBs it is subscription based. So let's go to the next slide, which is development time. As you can see, building this start is for when you are building a custom, when you are building without AI. But for now that AI is involved, you can virtually build a backend in 1 month, or in a week, or in a day, depending on if you know what you're doing. So this is not really a problem now. And but of course, BaaS is always faster than building a custom, because you have to test, you have to make sure everything is working well, you have to handle deployment and all that. But for backend as a service, you just need to connect a few things, a few clicks, you're done. So what are the pros and cons? Let us talk about the pros and the cons. Well, for custom backend, you have full control, but it's expensive because it requires hiring staff to manage. You definitely have to hire backend developers to manage the backend. When it comes to scalability and optimization, you can optimize the performance and security and cost based on your need. So you have full control over it. But in terms of the BaaS, you don't have control over it. You need to pay for cloud hosting and all that, and scaling solution also can be expensive. For custom backend, better security and compliance. You control your data security, your encryption, and your compliance. While for BaaS, they manage the security for you. You pretty don't have control over it. So it's whatever they provide, you have to go with. And then for custom backend, of course, there is no vendor locked in, which means that you are not tied to a specific third-party provider. It's reduced the dependency and external APIs and pricing changes. So you don't have problem with pricing changes or the APIs that can be consumed or blah 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 blah. No. You have full control over it. And for unlike when you're talking about BaaS, you don't really have control over it. So basically, when we're looking at it, then for the features, custom features, you can build custom feature. You can customize a custom backend as much as possible. You can stretch it to the limit. You can add features, third-party services, and all that. But for Backend-as-a-Service, you need specific tools, and all that. You can't really customize that much. You are tied to vendor specific provisions. So let us look at the pros and cons for Backend-as-a-Service. You have the faster development. It gives you faster development since you don't need staff for that. You can just spin that up in a day. And when it comes to the cost, free tier is cost effective, but costs can skyrocket as you increase usage, and then limit initial costs for custom backend. You can start literally for free or as low pricing, but of course as you grow, you begin to pay more because of you have to scale. So but there are ways around that. There are ways around limiting cost for custom backend. Once you start growing to a level, you should start thinking of having your own servers rather than using third-party servers, and hosting on third-party services. So that way, if you have your own servers and server maintenance, you can add that also as a service on the side, and that will reduce your costs. And you can also outsource, to other people also. But for what am I saying? Oh, sorry, that's for custom backend. But for BaaS, initial starting cost is low, but eventually it skyrockets. And automatic scaling. BaaS, enables automatic scaling, which means if you have high traffic, it will scale, low traffic, scale down, scale up, and scale down. It can automatically scale, increasing performance, and but the disadvantage of that is that pricing also, you can't specifically say that this is my cost per. You are using dynamic pricing, then it becomes a problem. A lot of companies have that issue, especially with services like AWS, where 1 month they are charging them tens and thousands of dollars, or a script runs endlessly all of a sudden, and then at the end of the month you are seeing thousands of dollars in bill from AWS. I've over time, some of the company I've worked with, they had this issue. There were some startups that I've worked with where, at some point they couldn't pay their staff because of AWS cost, because of the cost, that they were charging them that specific month. So that can be a problem. So for BaaS also, another disadvantage is, if your vendor shuts down or something happens or price changes, or they are migrating to a custom, you want to migrate to a custom backend, it can be a headache, serious headache. And I mean a serious headache. Now imagine your BaaS provider is closing down their service. Now you have to start thinking how you're going to do your application. You have to start looking for another BaaS, and most times, if those BaaS they don't usually, each one is doing things on their own, so you have to integrate from scratch. That can give you a whole lot of problem, or you realize that you need custom features and you have to now go back to the table to build a custom backend. So that are the great disadvantage with BaaS, and that's one of the reasons why I don't really use BaaS for my service. I see a lot of people using it. Fine, if you are building a small application, it is fine, you can use BaaS, but if you are building a application that is going to scale, it's going to grow, it's better you go for a custom backend. It's just better, to save you a lot of problems in the future. So then for maintenance, you have minimal maintenance for BaaS. You have minimal maintenance, that's the pro. And for the cons, you have less control over security and compliance. That's the bad side, which means that you rely on the provider's security policy. So if your provider gets hacked, your data is compromised. You understand all those things. So that is that about that. Now looking at scalability, of course you can easily scale, custom backend, but it requires manual configuration. You have to manually go back to your, application, and make some changes and all that. Load balancing, database optimization. You need a DevOps. You need to employ a DevOps service. But for BaaS, that is automatically handled for you. But on the background, so it automatically scales with your app's needs and all that. And the pricing can vary because of that. So when should you choose a custom backend over a BaaS? Do I keep saying BaaS, Backend-as-a-Service? So if you should choose backend when you want to launch quickly, you are looking for something simple and moderately complex. Like you want to launch an MVP, you want to launch a personal project, a mobile app, fine. You can use Backend-as-a-Service. But when you want to launch something big, you shouldn't use BaaS. Or when you lack backend expertise, maybe you are just a front-end developer and you don't really know much about backend. That's why it's good for you to be a all-round developer most times. If you are just a front-end developer, you can go for BaaS also. And if you prefer a pay as you grow model of pricing, also you can go for BaaS. But for custom backend, you need high customization and control over your architecture. Go for custom backend. If you are trying to avoid vendor locked in, that this app is going to scale, you're going to be working on it for a very long time, then you should use a custom backend. if you have specific security compliance requirement, like some states now, yeah, compliance is different from other states. So basically, in this type of scenario, you need a custom backend. And also, when you are building a complex SaaS, I see a lot of video out there where people are building SaaS and they are using Backend-as-a-Service. That should not be. If you are building a SaaS, you should build a custom backend. Most times it is better to build this, custom backend. And even if when you are now integrating AI powered, apps, you are introducing AI into your application, it is better. And for one more thing I want to say is that, if you are using BaaS, it is one major disadvantage is that all your code base is in the front end. So if your app gets hacked, both your front end, and your back end, logic is more like in one place. The logic that connects to your BaaS, everything is there. The only thing the hacker might not get is your keys. And if he happens to get your keys, yeah, that means he has access to your full application, which is very, very bad. That is why it's not always good to put, all your eggs in one basket. So in terms of that, it's very, very, it is a porous risk. You shouldn't do that. And also, even when you are building a SaaS, you should split the back end from the front end, so that when you have to employ developers, they won't have access to your full code. But imagine where you are using a backend as a service, and just using front ends to connect to it. This same person, any of your developers can take your app and go and launch their own. They launch another version of their own. All they need is to have access to the front end. But in the case where you have separation of concerns, you have some developers in the front end, some in the back end. They might not, the front end guys don't have access to the back end. Back end don't have access to the front end. So there's still a layer of security when it comes to that. And when your front end gets hacked, it's not, they don't have access to your back end. When your back end gets hacked, they don't have access to your front end. So that's another, advantage of having a custom backend. For me, I usually go for custom backend, but for whatever works for you, if you're a front-end developer, then it's okay for you to go for BaaS. And you don't know much on backend development. So, but also you can learn. You can take one of my courses on backend development. Also, I'll be linking that. And take it, and it will help you when it comes to developing backend application. So I hope that this guide has really helped you to align your architecture and your goals, to know which one to go for, depending on your budget, your requirements, your timelines. So I hope you've learned one or two things, and if you have learned one or two things from this, kindly like and subscribe to this channel for more insightful tutorials like this. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day.